the challenge that I have here is I put everything that I knew about gamification into that course. So I thought what I would talk to you about is the overall project, the opportunity for gamification to help transform education. Education is a $4 trillion global market. The e-learning part of it is growing 23% compounded annual growth rate. The corporate learning and training part of it, which is the part where it's easiest to see the application of gamification, that's this little gray part here, 8%, that's a $300 billion a year market. And most of it's awful. Most of it is terrible, and it needs to get better. And as big as these numbers are, they actually understate the opportunity. Because one of the things that we've learned with MOOCs is that there's far more demand for learning than we have in the traditional educational system. 80% of the people who take MOOCs, massive online courses, are not students. They're people who want access to knowledge and learning for their work or for other purposes, and it's demand that is not being served and cannot be served by the traditional educational system. In a world that's transforming as quickly as this one is, what you learn in school, in university, cannot possibly be everything that you need to know for your career. We are all learners, and we're all teachers. And we all have a responsibility to see what we can do to improve the quality of those learning experiences. All right, so where do games come into play? Three things quickly that we know about games that are relevant to education. The first one is that we have 35 years of research on games as tools for learning and motivation in education. We have entire fields studying games and learning and showing how video games, even commercial video games, can tie into motivating people, engaging them, educating them in all sorts of ways. The second thing that we know is that the basic mechanism of games, what makes games fun, what makes games engaging, is learning. Here's the famous quote from Ralph Koster in his great book, A Theory of Fun. In games, learning is the drug. What engages us in games is problem solving, pattern recognition, novelty. It's all about learning. The third thing that we know is that education, school, it's already a game. We have points, we have awards, we keep score, but it's a terrible game. It's not typically designed in the way a game designer would design things. We don't focus on feedback. We don't have clear win states. We don't talk about different player types, different kinds of people, and what they need to learn at that moment. We don't think about balance and all the sorts of things that a good game designer would think about in designing a game. So how can gamification help? Three ways I'd like to share with you: motivation, effectiveness, and credentials. The first one is where we've seen most of the activity, using gamification to improve motivation and engagement in learning. So I put up here Khan Academy. I could use hundreds and hundreds of different examples. Systems that use typically points and badges and so forth, achievements, levels, to make the learning experience more game-like, to bring people into the experience and pull them through the learning experience using some of the basic kinds of techniques that we see in games. Very powerful, very valuable, can be done well or poorly, but something we're only going to see more of across all forms of education. One of the things you have to realize in education is just how big it is. There are 130,000 schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, pre-university schools, just in the United States. And so there are thousands and thousands of teachers in those schools, as well as elsewhere, using these mechanisms that you never hear about, because it's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall opportunity. And I'm sure that's true in other places, countries like Spain and Europe and elsewhere as well. The opportunity is vast, and we need to expand the use of these techniques to motivate people. But that's not all we have to do. Motivation alone isn't enough. We need to actually improve the quality of learning. These are some pictures from my students at Wharton, the business school where I teach, in my gamification course. And people sometimes say to me, well, how can you give away your course on Coursera? How can you give it away for free to hundreds of thousands of people when your school charges a huge amount of money to go to school there, to take the courses from you? What I say is, the MOOC is what these students get for homework. It's what they do before they go to class. What we do in class is we build games. We analyze games. We do projects. We do challenges. I do interactive sessions with them. We target things to students' personal interests and skill sets. We work on things like facilitating creative thinking, problem solving, critical thinking, how you actually build knowledge, motivating people, getting them there, getting the butts in seats, as we say colloquially, essential, but not sufficient. So we need to think about how games can deepen and enhance the quality of the learning. And the third thing that we need to do is credentials. So you go to school, you go to university, you come out with a diploma. But it doesn't tell you very much. It just says that you went through this program and you passed. Well, with game-like reward systems and credentialing systems, primarily badges, we can do much better than that. So there's a great deal of work going on. The Open Badges project at Mozilla is probably the most sophisticated effort, but there's a lot that's just getting started to think about new kinds of gamified credential mechanisms for all forms of education, all levels, formal and informal. What this lets us do is provide much more transparency about what students are actually learning and what they're actually achieving. It allows for much more granularity, not just saying that you passed a program and you graduated, but we can go much more detailed about what are the skills that you learned, what's the knowledge that you got, what's the personal path that you followed through. And we can not just have one diploma, we can have lots and lots of different credentials that different people get within the same program because different credentials are relevant in different contexts. One employer or one context might want a certain set of credentials, another might want a different kind. There's no reason we have to be limited. We can do all of them. We can also recognize achievement in different ways. I put here PvE, PvP, that's what we talk about in massive online games, player versus environment. Objective measurements, how well you do in terms of mastery versus some static target, that's important. PvP, player versus player, how well you do versus everyone else in the class. Also important, but different. Relates to different kinds of student motivations, a different kind of achievement, and we can reflect both of them in these badge systems. So we need to be a lot more sophisticated and have mechanisms to recognize the outputs of all these forms of education in different ways than we have traditionally. So in doing that, we need to learn from game designers. And there's a whole range of things that we can learn from game design. I just put up a few examples here of some of the kinds of things that I thought about in designing the Coursera gamification course and that I think about in my own teaching. Feedback, utterly essential in games. In many ways, feedback is the fundamental thing that makes good games effective. And feedback can be delivered in lots of ways, but for it to be effective in a game, it needs to be frequent. You can't just say, you go through the game, you run around, and then at the end, you get a printout saying, congratulations, here was your score. No, you need to see it in real time, see how you're doing, and it needs to be actionable. It needs to allow you to change what you're doing. We have nothing like that in traditional education. We just have tests. Secure opportunities to experiment and to fail. Games get people to experiment because if you die, then you get another life. We need to create those same kinds of mechanisms and opportunities in education because learning is not just about rote memorization. It's about students stretching beyond themselves. This is something that goes back to educational theory, and students can stretch to a certain point, and the challenge of the educator is to help them get to that point. Onboarding and scaffolding. Good games pull you into the game. The game teaches you how to play the game. And in education, we just start with Unit 1. And this is something I thought a lot about in my course. I spent a lot of time and effort on the very first few videos and the first few things in the class to get people engaged. Level design. You go to any major games company, there are people whose title says level designer. It's a chapter in pretty much every major game design book. What's the equivalent of level design in education? We don't think about it. But it's important to creating an overall experience. Frequent small wins and periodic epic wins. We've heard about this in a few of the earlier talks. You need to get that constant feedback and that constant sense of achievement. You're doing something good a little bit, but you also need a sense that there's something bigger out there. There's something that you're shooting for, and ultimately you get to that epic win, that achievement that makes you feel really good about what you've accomplished. Again, that's very different from a traditional structure that says you do a bunch of things and then you get a test. Not the same. We need to think about how to use user data to understand what's going on in the class to improve the course, to create that feedback loop, use analytics in ways that online games have become very good at today, should absolutely apply to education and not just to online education. I'm not just talking about e-learning. I'm not just talking about the kinds of things that you might think about. I'm talking about all learning can apply these kinds of techniques. We need to understand there are multiple kinds of users. We had Andre talking about different player types. There's various frameworks for player types. Game designers think about different player types. When I did my Coursera gamification course, I thought about how to put something in there that would motivate different kinds of people. People who want to explore, to push the boundaries, well, create the greatest gamification wiki on the web. It goes beyond the course. People who want achievements, well, we've got things for that. People who want social, we've got peer learning groups, and we've got discussion forums where people can interact. Different ways to serve different kinds of learners in the same course. I call it polyphonic learning. Curiosity, puzzle, surprise, wonder. We don't think about this enough in education. We don't think about it enough in gamification in general. It's not just about rewards. That can be valuable. Points and badges and so forth can be useful. But ultimately, we want people to have a sense of wonder. And we can do that. But we need to shoot for it. Narrative. What good game designers do is tie together these small individual parts of the game to a larger whole. That's what narrative does. And again, in education, we typically think about just a unit of knowledge, another unit of knowledge, not weaving it together into a narrative. And finally, it's the experience, stupid. My course had about 65 5 to 10 minute videos. My goal was to have every single 5 minutes be engaging, because every 5-minute video was an opportunity for someone to drop out, to lose interest, to not maximize their potential as a learner. We need to constantly focus on the student experience. It's not that hard. The challenge is starting to think in that way, which traditionally in education we don't. So there were a lot of things that I did in my Coursera class. Just one to share with you. If you took the class, you know that there was a virtual scavenger hunt. There were bookshelves behind me, and in every video, again, there were about 60 videos, something changed. Different things moved around from video to video, and I said, well, there's a secret message. Go find it. Curiosity, puzzle solving, wonder. Not as a substitute for the content and the learning, but in addition to it. A way for people to engage with the class above and beyond the traditional kinds of things that we do in education. I've gotten tons and tons of feedback from people, including very experienced educators, e-learning experts, people from the MOOCs themselves saying, wow, what an amazing idea. And I think this is trivial. It's about the simplest thing you can imagine. No technology at all. All I had to do was like move some boxes around on the things behind me. Very, very simple. This can't be the best we can do. So here's my challenge for all of you here in the gamification field. Help us transform education. It's essential. It's incredibly important to our future, but to all of us in our careers as well.